Hello, everyone, and welcome to our latest edition of the Daily Stand Up Podcast. We are super excited today. I am stoked. I have someone with me who is a certified Scrum trainer and someone who I consider a dear friend. Anton, welcome to the show. How are you today?
Hey, I'm great. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here. It's amazing, and I just want people to understand just how special this is. If you take into account that there's only 250 certified Scrum trainers in the world, and here we are, two of us. That's pretty impressive. We got 1% of the entire population of certified Scrum trainers on the call at the same exact time, and that's just it's an honor and privilege to have you. But today, I understand that you have a topic that is near and dear to my heart, and we had a little discussion about this previously. But I wanted to spend some time with you today talking about slicing work and talking about what that means and how it applies. And I know that in the workspace, many people right now are struggling in the Agile space with trying to decipher what work is the right work to do when, and how do I know if I'm taking on the right work?
Mhm.
Help me understand, if you don't mind, Anton, what are some of the challenges that you're seeing, and what are some of the things that you're proposing to help people get past those challenges?
Yeah. No, thank you for that question. So, the typical setting that I work with when I work with people is either a training or I'm in a coaching situation within an organization. And typically, when I think of all the questions that people come to me with, like how do we estimate this, or who is responsible for that, or is this something a Scrum Master or a product owner should do, or should the developers do this? All of these questions are, when people ask them, actually quite important to them in this particular situation. However, when we start discussing them just like that, just without any further context of their work, we can have very long theoretical, philosophical, you could say, discussions that are not leading anywhere. While if we, instead of that, ask ourselves, what is, in the Scrum world, we can easily say it, what is the increment that we're working on right now? What is the valuable result that our work will lead to in the end?
Mm-hmm.
All of these discussions about roles and responsibilities, what meetings we need or not, they all tend to become very short, very pragmatic, and in fact, this is, from my point of view, exactly what we need when we are working in an agile way, right? Processes, we don't care about them. We need the results that actually work for someone.
And it's so interesting that you use that approach. I find that, especially recently, I've been having a lot of inquiries from people in the podcast world and in my Agile world and the AgileDad world about um, differentiating accountabilities and responsibilities, or talking about
Mm.
who should be doing what. And I'm seeing that more and more. And I can't tell you how many times I've thrown my hands in the air and said, I don't care, just get it done, right? I
Hmm.
don't care if you call the person Gummy Bear number 74. I don't care what their title is. I don't care what their role, explanation is. It doesn't matter. I
Hmm.
just want to know, are you surrounding yourself with a group of individuals that are able to get that increment done, that are
Yeah,
able to get a tangible result? And I feel like this is something that's missing. So I think you've definitely tapped into something. And
yeah.
that leads me to another question. So, if this is something that we both know people are struggling with, why is it so hard for organizations to think this way? Why is it so hard for them to break things down and decipher the way that you're
Mm.
talking about? Do you have an example maybe of something you could use that an
Yeah,
average listener could connect with that would make
yeah,
sense to them?
yeah. Let's start with an example that I'm using in my book, just to understand what the difference is between the different ways that you could break up work. So
Okay.
basically, we start with a dinner. Imagine you have a dinner for 12 or 20 guests. So it's big enough, so it's a actual project that you have to, split and cannot just start doing. Now, if you are facing such a project, you can have basically two different kinds of lists with which you can break up the work. You can start thinking, oh, well, I have this dinner, so what are going to be the entrees, the main courses, the desserts? Then what kind of guests will I get? Oh, yeah, some of them are vegetarians, some of them are even vegans, some of them definitely need to eat meat. And then you'll come up with different dishes and maybe sauces and all the different things that people can taste. And what I've just done was what we call a vertical breakup. right? Because every dish is something we can taste. Now, the other way you could split up this whole work for the dinner is you could create a list of all the things that they can do in order, or that you can do to prepare the dinner. You could wash the vegetables, peel potatoes, cut them, and so forth. All of the things that need to be done in order for the dinner to be ready. And this is something we call the horizontal slicing of work. Now, what I see in most organizations is that even though people call what they do Scrum or Agile, the final product of their work is actually just a horizontal slice. And this is something we need to definitely understand. It with this dinner example, it's actually quite simple, because once you have these two lists, you can ask yourself, for example, well, what happens if my guests come 2 hours earlier, or if I'm disturbed because something happens with my kids and I need to reduce the amount of dishes, or reduce the amount of work. I just don't have the same time that I planned for, right? So can I just take away one particular action? Can I just say I will not wash my knives, or I will not peel or not wash some vegetables? That's not going to end well, right?
Right.
No one's going to eat that. So you need, in order, if you want to reduce the scope, or even if you want to increase the scope, you do it by changing the dishes or the amount of dishes that you want to cook, right?
That's so interesting. Because for me, it almost it mirrors one of the topics that I think is another hot topic right now.
Mm-hmm.
And this topic is about limiting work in progress. So what I'm seeing is a lot of times, and I've seen this personally. So let me give you a little background. So I have a son who's in his 20s, and he's a chef. And what I can tell you is I've seen him in the kitchen before. And I've seen sometimes where he's in the kitchen where he's very focused, everything's going smooth, the dinner's all getting prepared, it all comes out at the right time, and everything's good. Then I've seen other times where maybe something goes wrong in the front of the house and something gets disrupted, and now he has to adjust his flow to accommodate for what's happening in the front of the house. And when he's asked to adjust his flow, sometimes that creates chaos, and it's hard for him to keep up. And I've seen him running around just, frantically grabbing ingredients, trying to pull things together, trying to make it, and the quality of the dishes suffer as a result of that. And I liken it to something that Ken Schwaber said. So I'm ancient, in case you haven't figured that out. I've been around since the very beginning of time. And when I took my class from Ken in 2003, he talked a lot about a potentially shippable product increment. And I think this is something that a lot of people have hung their hat on. What does that mean? What does a potentially shippable product increment mean? And I think this has a lot to do with the way that you're slicing things. And the analogy that my son used, and I hope that you can ride on this one a little bit. He said, let's pretend for a second we're going to make a cake. We're going to bake a cake. I said, all right. He says, so there are definite steps that you have to follow in order to bake the cake. He says, but I want to deliver it to you in a potentially shippable format. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go run and grab a bag of flour and just get a scoop and scoop a whole bunch of cups of flour in your hands. And he says, I'll be back. I got to go get a pan. So now you're standing here holding all that flour, right? And he comes back and he says, oh, wait, I forgot to give you the oil. And he pours the oil in your hand with the flour and says, I'll be back. I got to go get the pan. And by the time he's done, he's cracked eggs over your head. You've got hands full of flour and oil, and you still don't have a pan to make the cake in, right? It's just one of these things where we can have all the right ingredients, and we could have the proper instructions on how to do it. And we could have the oven preheated, but still not wind up with a cake.
Yeah, because
Oh, go ahead.
No, I just was wondering, because there are some. This is interesting. So the example you're talking about is about huge work in progress, right? So you never get to the cake because this is just the amount of cakes you are trying to create at the same time is actually so big that each individual cake is going to take too long. That's definitely a big problem, and this actually applies even, especially in a professional restaurant, a professional kitchen, the way you want to go, one dish by the other. However, the interesting part actually of these two stories, because I've told the story about the dinner a couple of times, and every time I have a chef in front of me, they will say, well, Anton, but this is not how you organize a professional kitchen. I say, yeah, you're right. In a professional kitchen, normally you have a menu, and actually very, very expensive restaurants, they have very short menus.
Right.
They have very few things that are very special for tonight, and the whole kitchen is optimized to doing that. So if you are if you're working in a professional kitchen, there is going to be one station where all of the vegetables are going to be cleaned and cut, and another station where someone will work with the pan and do everything. So it's interesting, but even everywhere you will want to have a short and small amount of whip. And the
Yeah.
question is, what is it that you are limiting your whip to? In a kitchen, it's simple. You have one someone just buys, I just want one piece of cake or one small cake, right? Or one spaghetti or something. So it's kind of obvious that a vertical slice in a restaurant is basically one order or one dish. But in most projects that I guess you and I are dealing with, when we're talking about digitalizing an agency, or when we talk about helping
Get satellites into space.
you'd get satellites into space. I was thinking about how do I introduce this, like this one organization that helps refugees to settle when they don't have enough space, right? So how do you change processes in a way where we have vertical slices? So very often when we talk about the projects that we are dealing with in the professional world, it's much less obvious what the individual slices are, what the
Right.
individual dishes are. And that is, I think, one of the difficulties why, to come back to your original question, why so many people, even though we talk about potentially shippable product increment, what is the increment in my actual project, right? I have people in my trainings whom I then talk for hours, and they explain to me that getting their very complicated stakeholder landscape to agree on something is a work of 3 months. So they break it up, this complicated work, but still having even a documented, negotiated agreement of your stakeholders is actually not resulting in anything.
Yeah.
So mm-hmm.
No, I was just going to say, and that brings me to a topic that I love to talk about. I always use this as my example.
Mm-hmm.
I say it doesn't matter how good or how well you can document a recipe. If
Mm-hmm.
the end result, the food doesn't taste good, you can write the recipe in calligraphy. If the end food doesn't taste good, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
And I think that too many people spend all their time either focusing on the technical user requirements document, the turd, right?
Yeah.
Which is never going to generate anything good. Or, and I guess what it boils down to is their focus is on output instead of outcome. And I think that if we could recenter our focus on outcome,
Mm-hmm.
happy customers, happy end users, solving a complex problem, finding a place for refugees, even if it's temporary fix, finding a place where they could settle until we get the permanent fix in place,
Mm-hmm.
those are the solutions we should be looking for, as opposed to the output, which may be very rigid and cause us to think or limit our ability to think. And while I think a limited menu is important, and by the way, even in some of our fast food places here, they're starting to shrink the menu.
Yeah.
So for example, here in America, if you went to Five Guys or if you went to In-N-Out, the menu is very short. There's only 5 things on the menu. That's it, 5 items. And one of those is a burger and the other one's a cheeseburger. It's just, so 2 of them are the same thing. One's with cheese and one's without. But it's just, they're starting to get to the point where they're realizing that by compressing the amount of options available, it's helping them really center themselves on creating a world-class experience with that type of product or service.
Yeah.
And I think this is tying us straight back to slicing and the art of slicing. So tell us more about your book and what people might expect to see there, and how does the art of slicing impact the world of work?
Right. So as we just said, it's hard to see what are the slices in more complicated projects than when we talk about dinner. But if you want to get there, if you want to be value focused or outcome focused, not output focused, there are just, there is a whole process that I basically explain in the book, and I could, give some buzzwords, but it's definitely not going to fit into a podcast. But the general idea, like the simplified idea, and I think this is easy enough to explain for anyone who just listens to this podcast, is if you want to start doing this, you need to start with the risks. Basically, this is the way I explain to C-level executives what Scrum is about. I'm not talking about iterations. I'm not talking about sprints. I typically talk about risk reduction. It's, in fact, what you do is when you start your project, you just say, let's imagine for a second or for 10 minutes that our project fails at every possible place. And you just collect, whether with stickies or somehow differently, you collect all the different risks, all the different things that could fail. When you do that, you then ask yourself, so of all of those risks that we just imagined, which of them are actually real and which of them are just, just so we could answer the question of how can we fail? Which of them do we believe are, should be taken seriously? And then the last question is, with what result, with what something that we can actually deliver, can we prove that this risk isn't there anymore? That this risk is diffused, or that this risk at least is reduced. And once you define this result, there you are. This is your slice. And if you are able to just take a project where, in my experience, very often when you look at projects, you actually only have 2 or 3 moments when something is delivered. And you create 20 little deliverables, which is maybe even not enough for them to do Scrum. It maybe still takes 1.5 months to deliver one of them. But it's still much better than waiting for half a year or a year until you have something. And if you have this 20 little steps, you already start becoming much more adaptable and having things that you see and test in the middle time. So if this is the one only thing that you take from this podcast, is just starting with the risk and then figuring out what result would diminish this risk, that is the first and main step to getting to vertical slices. And if you want to, the idea is if you just start doing this with many projects, you will automatically become an expert. It's
Right.
This question is typically it's kind of putting your head around. It's kind of turning your head around, because when you are an expert in something and someone asks you, could you please split this work, what you typically end up with as horizontal slices and not vertical. So if you just practice it for a couple of weeks, I definitely promise you will see so many more vertical slices where you previously thought there is no other options.
And that is so interesting. And this ties me to just one final thought that I was thinking when you said this. I think so often we get tied into sprint cycles, and it has to be 1 week or 2 weeks, that we forget that a release cycle of a potentially shippable product or service doesn't have to map directly to a sprint cycle. We could have sprints that are just a heartbeat that continue to go on and on and on. But we should map our release cycles to something that's something tangible, that's something that provides value, or something that solves a problem, or in this case, as you mentioned, something that reduces risk. And I think that that's so important. Even in some of my product owner classes recently, my advanced CSM classes or CSPO classes, I've been finding that when we talk about how to do objective stack ranking, or how to get people to start thinking differently about the way they're organizing their backlog, one of the very first things that I point out is you should measure 3 things. You should measure priority or urgency to the strategic orientation of the business. What is the most urgent thing that we can do that's going to deliver value? Then you should look at Moscow. What is the thing that the consumer can't live without? What is the customer sentiment, consumer sentiment? What is the one thing that they say, if we have this, it's going to solve world hunger, or it's going to make the world a better place, or it's going to make our jobs, our lives much easier? And then the third thing has to do with size. And then once you have all 3 of those, you understand the scope of what you're being asked to do, then you should be able to work it into a consumable slice, which is what you're describing right now. But without knowing all 3 of those, it makes it hard for you to get that consumable slice. And I think that's kind of the gap, and that's what we're facing. And when you ask people to go through the effort of doing this, a lot of people think it needs to be something incredibly time consuming. That's going to be another long meeting where everyone's in a room and we're trying to identify things. When in actuality, it's super simple. And I think you hit the nail on the head, Anton, when you said, if we just focused on risk first and looked for what is the highest risk thing, if it has to do with architecture, infrastructure, if it has to do with a level of complexity in a kitchen, it doesn't matter what it is. Just
something not knowing whether customers will like it or will just follow your advice, or if whatever it is that you're trying to solve, whatever it is that you're trying to change. Very often we are trying to change how people behave, and actually almost never will they behave the way we thought.
Yeah. It was like the time when Steve Jobs was told. So Steve Jobs, Apple, was working on a contract with the government. and he had an idea. He said he was using a BlackBerry, and he was so. I don't know if you know what that is. Not the fruit BlackBerry, but the actual device that you use. Where
I'm not that young, even though I
so,
look good.
so he was using a BlackBerry. That was for all my listeners, not for you.
Yeah.
So the BlackBerry, he was typing, and he says, "This is silly." He says, "Why is half of this device a keyboard?" He says, "Why can't we just make something that's flat with a glass screen where the keyboard can appear and disappear?" And the president of BlackBerry at the time looked at Steve Jobs and said, "Are you crazy? Who on earth would walk around all day long with a device with a glass screen and carry it in their pocket? Who would do such a thing? That's insanity." I don't have to tell you the end of the story, right? Everyone in the world has one. And it's just one of those things where I think sometimes, and this ties directly into your words of wisdom, and I want to make sure everybody's aware. Anton, what you have just described has been so wise. It's been profound. And I think sometimes we need to look at ourselves and say, are we really solving a problem? If not, are we really providing something that's a world-class solution that people care about? And if not, are we eliminating risk or helping reduce risk so that we have greater flexibility to fail? And I think that sounds strange when I say it, but failure is an important component to this. It's a component where we need to make sure that we understand that, it can't be catastrophic failure. But if we have the freedom to fail, that's going to give us the freedom to innovate. And if we can get to that state of innovation, that's going to get us where we need to be.
For all we know, in all of those domains where we try to change how people will behave, the normal percentage of ideas that actually end up working is way below 20%.
Yeah.
So if we never fail, if we never find out that we fail, that means we go on and invest our energy into those 80% that don't make the needle move at all. That may even be hurtful. And I see so many organizations that actually fail on checking what they're doing and, keep on investing.
So the actual number, just so all the viewers know, so it was a Gartner research report that I saw. They surveyed over 5,000 projects, and the actual number is 16.9%, so just under 17%.
Okay.
So that number is very accurate. So you were right on target there, Anton. So last question for you, because I want to make sure that everybody knows where to find you. Where can they go to learn more about you, learn more about the book, learn more about your best-selling book? If it's not there, it will be. Where can people learn about these classes and what you're offering? Because I think people are going to get excited about this. Tell us more about where they can find you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Just go to slicingwork.com. You will find everything there. It's the book, potential training that I'll offer on the topic of the book, and so forth.
And this is available both in the United States and in Germany, where you are, correct?
Absolutely, yeah. The trainings actually right now are they are all in English, and they are half-day trainings that start, I think, at 8 a.m. Pacific time. So they are even completely doable for anyone in the US.
There we go. That's interesting. Very cool.
Yeah.
Well, Anton, I got one last question for you. And this is a question that I ask to everyone who comes on the show. If you were walking on the beach and you stumbled across something in the sand and you picked it up and dusted it off and found a genie lamp. Now, this genie lamp isn't a typical genie lamp. It's a pre-used genie lamp, meaning the genie comes out and says, Anton, normally I would give 3 wishes, but someone used 2. I only have 1 wish left. If you could make 1 wish to help make the world a better place, what would your wish be? What would be the one thing that you would do to help change the world, to make it a better place?
What a beautiful question. I think I'm not sure it's going to still be the same answer in a couple of days, but right now, if I could make everyone in the world feel what everyone else feels, so that we cannot, we don't need to speak about it, that we can internally just feel what other people around us will feel. That's a tough constraint to put us in. I think people will suffer for the first couple of months, but I am sure that just in order to survive this new reality, the world will change quite much. I think we will have a much better world.
I think that's a beautiful answer. And I think that one of the topics, and this has been another topic that I've talked about a lot lately, is having empathy without bias, leading in with empathy without
Mm,
bias. I think sometimes when we come into a situation where we're trying to understand how someone else feels, we are listening with the intent to respond instead of listening
mm,
with the intent to understand. And it's causing us to have bias, whether it's confirmation bias or partial bias or even self-reliant bias. It's one of those things where we're coming in with a preconceived notion or preconceived view and not giving the other party a chance to
mhm.
really tell us what's happening in their mind. And I
Right.
think it'd be beautiful. I do want to admit, though, I think it'd be very, very difficult. Like you said, for the first 2 or 3 months walking by people and understanding how they feel, I'd be like, ooh, this is uncomfortable. But I
Mhm,
think once you got to the point where you did understand how other people feel, I feel like you could leverage that as a tool to help you be a better person and help the world better understand uh, what people are going through, because we all face trials, no matter where we are in the world, no matter what financial state we're in, we all face trials.
mm.
And I'm happy that you went there because I think that's a valuable piece of advice for everyone. Anton, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you
If
for
you want to
having
learn
me.
more about Anton, I'm going to go ahead and drop all the information on Anton and slicing work in the show notes. And we are looking forward to many more episodes together. Anton, you're welcome anytime. And until next time, I encourage you all to stay healthy, stay well, and stay agile, my friends. Do take care. Bye now.